Hello. Good morning, everyone. I'm so sorry for this inordinate delay. Anyways, next 8 classes, I think it will take 8 classes, we will discuss topics of ancient history. Before I talk about, before I jump into the syllabus, there are some very obvious and basic questions we need to answer. So the first is the relevance of this topic for examination. Why do we study ancient or medieval history? So what I have realized is, looking at past 10 years question, is that if you add all the topics of history and culture, that includes ancient, medieval, modern and art and culture, then UPSC asks about 20 questions from all of these 4 topics combined together. Now they often give a lot of weightage to modern history without any doubt, and modern history also has a direct bearing on your main syllabus. So for example, you can expect about, let's say, 8 questions from modern history in prelims examination. Out of those 12, you can distribute this in the other 3 topics, ancient, medieval and art and culture. However, in last, especially साल का अगर आप paper देखोगे तो you'll realize that the number of questions from ancient and medieval are 10. So 5 questions from ancient and 5 questions from medieval, and 5 questions from modern also, and about 4 questions from art and culture. So, and last year also, similarly, there were 10 questions from ancient and medieval history. So I do feel that this topic has become relevant, although it does not mean that a trend has been set, because UPSC can always surprise you. There have been years जहाँ पे ancient medieval दोनों मिला के 5 क्वेश्चन आए हैं, बट इस साल जैसे 10 क्वेश्चन थे, पिछले साल भी 10 क्वेश्चन थे. So 10 क्वेश्चन इज अ वेरी वेरी गुड वेटेज. 10 क्वेश्चन अगर किसी भी टॉपिक से आ रहे हैं, so you should take those topics seriously. So for prelims examination, you can expect anything from 8 to 10 questions from these 2 topics, ancient and medieval history combined together. Okay. So that is the relevance of prelims. Regarding mains examination, history, ancient and medieval history is not mentioned anywhere in your syllabus directly. So for example, if you look at the paper 1 syllabus, the term is art and culture. Literature, art and culture, architecture, all of these terms are there, but you do not find questions of history. However, I will show you a few of the questions which frankly cannot be categorized as a question of art and culture. There are some questions even in paper 1 that there will be question of history. I will give you few examples here and there. However, that does not happen each and every year. After every alternate year, you can expect a question in paper 1 which will have, like, you do need a good knowledge of history to answer those questions. Right, so for mains, this is not a very, very relevant topic, frankly. However, an understanding of ancient and medieval, of course, is important to know about a lot of things. For example, a lot of what is happening today also. But for prelims examination, it is a very, very important topic. For mains, it is not that much, not exactly how important it is for prelims. So that is the first question, relevance of this topic. The second question is that which sources should you refer to? Now here, and what type of question you can expect from these 2 topics. I'm combining ancient and medieval together here. So I should also tell you that this is perhaps the most difficult topic in UPSC examination, and the reason is very simple, because it is very, very factual. बहुत ही ज़्यादा factual है, and there have been hundreds of books written on ancient and medieval history, and UPSC is not bound to pick, like, for example, stick to any one source. They can pick any source and they can ask any type of question. So that is why this topic is difficult, frankly. Both ancient and medieval history, they are difficult. Because even if you, let's say, for example, I'm going to prescribe you just one textbook, and even if you, let's say, for example, have read everything from that textbook, and if you have gone through everything I'm going to discuss in the classroom notes, even then, it will not be sufficient. And the reason I'm addressing this question is that बहुत बार students का question होता है कि सर ये sufficient होगा क्या? तो मैं अभी बोल देता हूँ sufficient नहीं होगा. So there will be questions, and it's very important that जितना ज़्यादा आप reality से जितना ज़्यादा पास आ जाओ उतना better है आपके लिए. So there are, let's say, for example, my expectation is that if there are 10 questions in prelims examination, I'm very, very sure that at least there will be 2, 3, even 4 questions which you should not even attempt. Well, I'm telling you here and now that do not try to attempt all of the questions of एंशियंट और मिडिवल हिस्ट्री, बिकॉज एक टाइप ऑफ क्वेश्चन यूपीएससी का आता है, दे विल आस्क यू, दे विल गिव यू अ टर्म and they will ask you the meaning of that term, and they can pick this term from anywhere, and so not for example all the textbook you have referred to. So ideally if you do not have any information about that term, you cannot like come to any type of if you cannot have any type of reasoning or some logic, do not try to attempt those questions, though there is a very good chance that you will get it wrong. So my expectation will be that out of 10, let's say you attempt 8 questions, you get 6 or 7 correct. That will be very, very good attempt according to me from ancient and medieval history. Okay. So because this is a difficult topic and there are n number of sources you can refer to, UPSC is not bound to pick any source, they can pick कुछ भी उठा सकते हैं, तो उस हिसाब से फिर, but इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि you are also going to read like lot of things, because there is always an input and output game. How much input you are giving to a topic and how much output you are going to get. So for, let's say for example, to attempt 2-3 extra question, you are reading 2-3 books, and even then there is not a guarantee that you are going to get all the answers correct. So that is why it is about input output game. So for example, more focus should be given to those areas where you know that you can attempt more question and where accuracy can also be high. Let's say polity. Polity में आपका accuracy 90% होना चाहिए. ये polity के 15 से 20 क्वेश्चन आएंगे, आपको उसमें से अगर मान लो 18 क्वेश्चन आते हैं पॉलिटी के, कम से कम 16 सही हैं, आप 16-17 अटेम्प्ट कर रहे हो, एंड ऑलमोस्ट एवरी क्वेश्चन इज करेक्ट, एक दो गलत है. सिमिलरली इकोनॉमी इज अ सेक्शन जहां पे बहुत सारे क्वेश्चंस होंगे, अटेम्प्ट भी आप बहुत कर सकते हो, सही भी बहुत होंगे. एनवायरमेंट इज अ सेक्शन. सो दीज आर द एरियाज फॉर एग्जाम्पल जहां पे आपको इनपुट ज्यादा देने की जरूरत है. That does not mean I'm teaching this topic and I am speaking against this topic. That does not mean that this is not important. So for me, ancient and medieval history is important because if there are sitter questions, if there are easy questions and medium level question, that you should attempt. जो difficult question है, term वाले question है, उसको लेके बॉदर होने की कोई जरूरत नहीं है, परेशान होने की कोई जरूरत नहीं कि एक दो क्वेश्चन अगर नहीं हो रहा है, दैट इज टोटली फाइन. बट इफ देयर आर क्वेश्चंस व्हिच कैन बी अटेम्प्टेड बाय, लेट्स से फॉर एग्जांपल क्लासरूम नोट्स एंड फ्रॉम रीडिंग बेसिक टेक्स्ट बुक, then a person who is going to clear prelims and person who is not, this can be a differentiating factor. So you cannot expect that there are 10 questions from these two topics and you have not attempted a single question or perhaps 1 or 2 questions. You cannot expect that. So you have to attempt 60%, 70% of the question from these two topics, and accordingly you can also hope for, let's say for example, an 80% accuracy in this section. For that, ancient and medieval are important. So it can be a differentiating factor if you clear prelims or if you do not clear prelims, right? So on that note, on that like threatening note, let's start. So third question is that which source you should refer to. There are many textbooks which you can refer to. For example, you can refer to the most important source which I prescribe will be R.A. Sharma, Ancient History by R.A. Sharma. Where is the pencil? Acha, yahan pe, sorry. The most important source will be Ancient History by R.A. Sharma. For me, this is the most important source. Now, this is also old NCERT. ये old NCERT जो है, you can either buy this as an old NCERT, which is fine, or you can also buy this as Oxford publisher has published the same book, and it is available by the name Ancient History by R.A. Sharma. There is no difference per se. Both are exactly same book. So you can either buy old NCERT or you can buy this. Anyways, the second question the second source which you should refer to, if you, let's say for example, and the reason I'm mentioning this book is because it is comprehensive book, it has a lot of content, and at the same time, well, it's not going to take a lot of your time. It is, for example, what I have realized in last 2-3 years is that one source has become very, very important for UPSC, and still I'm not mentioning that source. However, it can be an optional reading. Few chapters can be an optional reading, and that source is, the name of the book is Ancient and Early Medieval India by Upinder Singh. So if somebody, let's say for example, किसी का अगर history optional है तो mandatory book है. But if so there is a textbook available in the market. आप जाना कभी book shop पे बस book उठा के देख लेना. You do not have to buy it. The name of the book is Ancient and Early Medieval India by Upinder Singh. Upinder Singh herself is a great historian. She is also daughter of our former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. So, and she is a very celebrated historian for ancient and early medieval India. She taught in Delhi University and very popular for many of the textbook. One of them is Ancient and Early Medieval India. Now, I am not prescribing this textbook, and the reason is very simple. Because as I told you, ancient medieval से 8 से 10 क्वेश्चन आएंगे. इसके लिए आप इतनी, it's a very comprehensive textbook. It is going to take a lot of time to read the entire textbook. If you have, then you can refer to some chapters, some selected chapter. For example, chapter on Mauryas, chapter on Guptas. Similarly, development which occurred from about 200 BC to 200 AD. So these are 3 chapters you can go and read, but even if you do not, that is totally fine. So you do not have to, but this textbook has become important because a lot of questions are being asked from this textbook. However, that does not mean that a trend has been set up. They can always change the textbook, they can always pick some other textbook and ask questions from there also. So these are, ये जो source है comprehensive है, बहुत ज़्यादा टाइम नहीं लेगा. ये कुछ ज़्यादा कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव है, काफ़ी सारा टाइम लेगा, इसीलिए मैंने आपको नहीं बोला है. बट इफ यू डू नॉट हैव लॉट ऑफ टाइम, देन यू कैन गो एंड रिफर टू ऑल्सो ओल्ड एनसीईआरटी ऑफ क्लास 6th. ये आप पढ़ सकते हो, और इवन यू कैन रीड न्यू एनसीईआरटी. Now new NCERT of either class 6th. Class 6 का अगर जाओगे तो there is a book called Our Pasts 1. Or you can also refer to class 12, both in fact try to refer to both the textbook. Class 12 की book है एक, Themes in Indian History. One. Our Past 1, that will talk about ancient history. Themes in Indian History 1 will talk about ancient history. Both of them are very well written books. Especially I am a huge fan of new NCERTs. They are very well written book, but they are not comprehensive. So for a basic awareness about this topic, I think these are very good sources, but do not expect it to be comprehensive, right? So that is why these are not, these textbooks are not the exactly textbook I am prescribed. But a more comprehensive than these 2 textbooks from old NCERT and new NCERT can be even Tamil Nadu textbook. So it is definitely more comprehensive than old NCERT of class 6th or even new NCERT. Not as comprehensive as the R.S. Sharma book, but definitely it is also a very good textbook which you can refer to. So if I have to recommend, the best textbook you should go is read by R.S. Sharma, read that book. The second source I will recommend is, let's say for example you feel that even R.S. Sharma is very bulky for you, very huge for you, then you can go and refer to Tamil Nadu board textbook. I think that is a very well written textbook. Not as comprehensive as the earlier 2 sources, but definitely a very good textbook. So these are the sources which you need to refer to. Okay, so now that we have discussed these three important questions, the relevance of the topic, the source, right? Now let's start with the topic itself. Sorry? Market में जाओगे मिल जाएगा. So he's asking that how do you differentiate. New NCERT का app भी available है. So if you go and install e-पाठशाला app, you will find new NCERT के सारे textbook का PDF format में ऐसे भी मिल जाएगा. वो आपको old NCERT का नहीं मिलेगा. But in any case, go and all the shops they know कि old NCERT कौन सी है, new NCERT कौन सी है. So just go and ask them कि old NCERT चाहिए class 6 की, they will tell you. Okay. Old NCERT has been written by Romila Thapar. New NCERT के कोई एक author नहीं है per se. New NCERT our past करके available है, right? So old NCERT will be ancient India by Romila Thapar. New NCERT will be our past one, and वो this is very easily available. एक और जो differentiator है, old NCERT का printing बहुत खराब है, new NCERT का printing better है. So if you want a differentiator. So anyways, let's start the topic. So before I do feel that a good way of studying history is always try to study history in terms of themes, like which are the important themes which we are going to discuss. I picked this idea from New NCERT itself because if you go to class 12 textbook, the name is Themes in Indian History. So all the themes I'm going to discuss in ancient history classes. So in today's class, for example, the first theme I will be discussing is, I will give you a brief outline of all of the topics I'm going to discuss in these classes. So the first theme I'm going to discuss will be what we call prehistoric period. Now prehistoric period will include the stone ages where writing was not there, proper well established cities are definitely not there. In later part of prehistoric period you have some early village settlements, right? So for example it can be divided into Paleolithic, Mesolithic and Neolithic, and I will discuss the meaning of all these terms, Paleolithic, Mesolithic or Neolithic, but this is the first period. The second theme I am going to discuss here is, and perhaps यहाँ से सबसे important आपका जो syllabus है शुरू होता है, that is I am going to discuss about Indus Valley Civilization or also known as Harappan Civilization. So these two topics I am going to discuss in today's class. Indus Valley Civilization. The third theme I am going to discuss here is that with decline of Indus Valley Civilization, there is a gap here, but Aryans came to Indian subcontinent, and जो पूरा Aryan period है, that can be divided into early Vedic and later Vedic phase. So, and by the way, before I talk about next themes, there are some like very basic concepts which you should be clear about. Two concepts. First, how do we divide ancient, medieval and modern? Anyone who has like a answer to this question? How do we come to this term ancient, medieval or modern history? So it was actually started by Britishers. When Britishers came to India, and they were very much again interested about historiography of Indian subcontinent. So they initially divided the period of history, because by the way, this classification was already popular in Europe, that ancient Europe, medieval Europe and modern Europe. However, the same ancient, medieval, modern, exactly same timeline, same properties of course cannot be applied here. So what they devised is that they devised it in terms of Hindu period, Muslim period and British period. Now this is of course not a very good classification because of many number of reasons. The first reason is of course it has a lot of communal element here, that you're trying to divide this on the basis of religion. But if that is the basis, then why not Christian period? So Hindu, Muslim, Christian period kar do. That was the first criticism. The second criticism is that just by using the religion of ruling class, how can you categorize one entire period to be ancient or medieval? Let's say for example ancient India की जब हम बात करते हैं, तो even in ancient India you have Buddhism and Jainism which were very prevalent at one point of time, right? So you cannot say Hindu period per se. Similarly, even in medieval India, when Delhi Sultanate was ruling, there were many regional kingdoms who were actually Hindu kingdoms. So you cannot say Muslim period also. एंड जो पूरा क्रिश्चियन पीरियड है, फिर आपने क्रिश्चियन वर्ड भी नहीं यूज कर रखा है. So there was a lot of criticism against this division of ancient, medieval and modern based on Hindu, Muslim or British. So in fact many Indian historians and some British historians also changed the classification, and the classification now emerged not only on the basis of political developments which occurred in the ancient and medieval time, but also social and economic development. Just for example, we try to understand when we discuss ancient history that in initial phases a lot of focus is on coming of emergence of an empire, that how India became one political entity, let's say for example during the reign of Chandragupta Maurya or even during the time of Samudragupta, right? And later we find out that such type of political entity, so it took thousands of years for first political entity, the entire India ruled by one political entity, that was by Mauryas, right? And again Samudragupta also ruled on a much larger territory, not exactly as large as Mauryas, but he did rule a much larger territory. But after that we do find that there are no any major political power which included entire subcontinent as part of their territory. And so that is a political decline, but it also led to many economic and social decline. For example, the type of control centralized kingdoms had then on their kingdoms, the type of economic activity, population explosion, all of those things also changed from ancient to medieval period. So political factors are not the only factors. We also have to include economic and social factor when we are trying to divide this time period into three phases. In fact, many historians now categorize ancient history till about 6th or 7th century. Especially Harshvardhan can be, जो पूरा reign of Harshvardhan है, that can actually mark the beginning of end of ancient history. So it is not 1 year जहाँ पे हमने एक बार बोल दिया कि okay this year ancient history ends. It cannot be 1 year, but it can be perhaps a century. For example, 6th century or 7th century जो पूरा phase है, that marks the end of ancient history. And from 7th century to 12th century, we use what we call early medieval India. Now early medieval India saw emergence of many regional kingdoms. It saw emergence of various types of economic activities, and many social developments also occurred at this period of time, which even today are very, very relevant. And the late medieval India hai, that starts with advent of Islam into India. The first Delhi Sultan, even before Delhi Sultanate, in fact, Ghazni attacked India, then Gauri attacked India, and finally Delhi Sultanate was established. Right? So that part जो है 12th century to 18th century we discuss is as part of late medieval India or simply medieval India. Okay, and finally the death of Aurangzeb, where after that Mughals started declining, and it led to emergence of many regional kingdoms, first Marathas of course, and later of course with the advent of Europeans and Britishers became the most important power. That period is known as modern history. So this classification is the most accepted classification used by historians. Okay. So anyways, second theme will be Indus Valley Civilization. The third theme is going to be Vedic Age. And Vedic Age can be divided again into two periods. Early Vedic Age and later Vedic Age. What are the differences? We will discuss that as we go ahead. The fourth theme which we are going to discuss here will be, if you want to write down, I'm not going to dictate these things. If you want to write down, I will dictate a lot of things. But if you feel that something is important, should be written down, and if I'm not dictating, do that on your own. So the next theme which I'm going to discuss will be emergence of Mahajanpads, जो पूरा Mahajanpad age है. And especially rise of Magad. Now Magad is what modern day Bihar is, and especially the center of Magad was Patliputra, which what modern Patna is. So Mahajanpads, emergence of 16 Mahajanpads, these are kingdoms which emerged in ancient times, and out of all those Mahajanpads, Magad became the most powerful. The next theme I'm going to take a little detour here, and I will discuss the first set of invasions which occurred in ancient period. So that will be Persian and Greek invasion. Anyone has seen the movie 300? So you remember Xerxes जो पूरा है when he goes and attack Greeks. So 300 movie is quite good, but historically it's a very fraud movie. So historically it's a very stupid movie, frankly. But of course, as a cinematography, as a story, it's quite a good movie. So it is a movie. It is a work of fiction. Anyways, the villain in the movie 300, Xerxes, his father was Darius, and Darius had attacked India, and he had occupied northwest frontier, what modern day Pakistan or jo pura Sindh region hai. So that actually at one point of time was part of Persian territory. And later, of course, Alexander attacks, and he did defeat Porus. However, he did not enter into mainland of India, right? So that is the next theme I'm going to discuss. And theme 6 will be, which will be again very, very important, a proper dedicated discussion on the Mauryan Empire. So Mauryan Empire starts with Chandragupta Maurya, and first three rulers are the most important one, जहाँ पे हम बहुत ज़्यादा focus करेंगे. Chandragupta Maurya, Bindusar and Ashok, especially Ashokan inscription and the entire idea of Ashoka's Dhamma. We are going to have a lot of discussion surrounding that. But after Ashoka, Mauryan Empire declines, and the last ruler, his name was Brihadrath. He died in 187 BC. He was assassinated, in fact, by his commander Pushyamitra Shunga in 187 BC. So Mauryan Empire is a very, very important theme from ancient history, jahan pe I think we are going to have a dedicated one class or perhaps even 1.5 class on this topic. So the next theme which we are going to discuss is that, so all of the discussion till now mainly includes what is happening in northwest frontier, so from the region of Pakistan. By the way, when I am discussing ancient and medieval history, I have to include entire subcontinent. I cannot just talk about the mainland India, what today is. We also have to talk about what developments occurred in the northwest frontier of India, especially in Pakistan and Afghanistan, right? So I'm going to use the word subcontinent a lot. Subcontinent has a very important, in fact, अच्छा, by the way, ये पिछले साल UPSC ने मेंस में क्वेश्चन पूछा था, that why do we use the term Indian subcontinent? Why ये Indian subcontinent का significance क्या है? ये term हम use क्यों करते हैं? तो एक पार्ट जो उसका सबसे सिग्निफिकेंट पार्ट ऑफ, बाय द वे दिस वाज अ क्वेश्चन ऑफ ज्योग्राफी, सो द सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट जो फैक्टर उसका होगा वो ज्योग्राफिकल फैक्टर्स होंगे, हिमालय, इंडियन ओशन, right? So you have to talk about the geographical features, but you also ideally should discuss other factors, let's say historical factors, cultural factors. ये factors भी बहुत important हैं, that why do we use the term subcontinent for this entire reason. So anyways, after Mauryan Empire, we are going to take a, we are going to in fact discuss more invasions, so more foreign invasions. More foreign invasions, especially 4 set of invasion occurred at this point of time. First by Greeks. Greeks had settled into the region of Sindh, Gandhar, and they attacked India. So invasion by Greeks, by Shakas, by Parthians, and finally invasion by Kushans. And I will also tell you time period, that if I'm talking about all of these things, what is more or less the time period I'm talking about. Just for example, let's start here. When I'm talking about prehistoric period, that actually includes the largest time period, but I'm going to not spend a lot of time here. But it does include as early as 500,000 years ago, or even 1 million years ago, till, let's say for example, about 3000 BC. So the largest of human history actually belongs to prehistoric period. Indus Valley civilization का जो time period है, that will be about 2600 BC to 1300 BC. जो Vedic age का time period है, that will be about from 1500 BC to 600 BC. Mahajanpad's rise of Magad from 600 to 300 BC. Persian Greek invasion, again it started in 5th century BC, it went on till 3rd century BC, so there is a overlap here. Mahajanpad rise of Magad and Persian Greek invasion, it same time period में हुए. Mauryan Empire from 3rd century BC, so in fact from about 321 1 or 324 BC till 187 BC. Right? So a huge period of about 200 years that we are going to discuss in Mauryan Empire. Foreign invasions, now this is the time where we are going to enter into Christian era. जो common era जो हम use करते हैं. So from BC, before Christ, we are going to enter into common era or Christian era. That will include from BC we are going to shift to AD. So all of this development invasion by Greek, Shakas, Parthians, Kushans that happened from about 2nd century BC to 2nd century AD or even 3rd century AD. Now theme 8 we are going to take a detour here. We are going to shift our focus to what is happening in Deccan region and to what is happening in southern part of the Indian subcontinent. So in Deccan region, a very important empire emerged with the decline of Magad, its Satvahan Empire. And theme 9, I'm going to talk about what is happening in the southernmost part of the country. So the next theme which we are going to discuss will be Sangam Age. Now Sangam Age talks about development which happened in the region of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And 3 important kingdoms we are going to discuss here, Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas. The reason it is called Sangam Age because यहाँ पे जो सबसे important source है वो Sangam literature है. So that also includes about 3rd century BC to 3rd century AD. So a period of 600 years we are going to cover here. Right? And theme 10, which is again a very, very important theme, will be we are going to talk about with the decline of Kushanas and with the decline of even in southern India you have decline of Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas. A very powerful, Magad again became very powerful under Guptas. So we'll talk about Gupta Empire, again a proper dedicated class on this topic. And with decline of Guptas, you have emergence of many regional kingdoms, and all those regional kingdoms at one point of time, especially northern part, they were consolidated by Harshvardhan. So that will be the next theme. Now Harshvardhan died in 647 AD. Right, so I'm talking about 7th century here. And in fact, death of Harshvardhan, in fact, entire 7th century is a transition period from ancient to early medieval India for historians because of not only political fragmentation but lot of also social and economic development. Theme 10 we are going to discuss about emergence of many other, theme 11 we are going to discuss about emergence of many other regional kingdoms. For example, we are going to talk about in south a very powerful empire emerged is Pallavas. And contemporary to Pallavas are Chalukyas. Theme 12. Acha, sorry. Thank you. So next theme which we are going to discuss will be what we called Kannauj triangle or tripartite struggle. Kannauj became very important center, and 3 kingdoms here fought for more than 150 years to occupy Kannauj. These are Palas, Pratihars, and Rashtrakutas. And last theme I am going to discuss will be Imperial Cholas. These are all of the topics we are going to discuss. So even though it does actually tells you just ancient history, but I'm also going to include topics of early medieval India as part of these classes. So these are all of the topics I will repeat. I will start from prehistoric period, Indus Valley civilization, Vedic age, Mahajanpad, rise of Mughal, Persian Greek invasion, Mauryan Empire, more foreign invasion, Satvahan, Sangam age, Guptas, Harshvardhan, Pallavas, Chalukyas, tripartite struggle, and finally imperial Cholas. All of the topics we are going to discuss in next 8 classes. Okay, so there is a question by Sundaram that what about Buddhism and Jainism? So lot of themes, lot of topics from ancient and medieval India. I'm not going to discuss as a topic of history because it will be discussed dedicatedly in culture. So I will definitely talk about the age when Buddhism and Jainism did develop, why did it develop, why did it decline also. I'm definitely going to discuss all of those things, but a proper development of religion, that will be discussed as a topic of art and culture. Similarly, जो cultural history है, so cultural history also I'm not going to discuss here. Third topic which I'm not going to discuss here is the literary development. Now literary development I will use as long as it is an important source of history. So I will discuss about all the important literary sources which are important work of history, okay? But I'm not going to talk about literary development per se. So these 3 topics, religious development, literary developments, and cultural developments. Cultural development basically means architecture, music, dance, and even other art forms. All of those topics will be discussed in art and culture classes, okay? So that there is no overlap among topics. Is that clear? Right? So on that note, next topic, next thing which should be very, very clear, and I'm very sure it is very clear to all of you, but just to revise, that how do we study history? So for history we require sources. For example, history as a word basically means everything which has happened in the past, right? History, when let's say for example, if I have to define the meaning of word history, it means everything which has happened in the past. But can we know everything? The answer is we cannot know everything, okay? We have to rely on sources. If we are trying to reconstruct that whatever has happened in the past, what are the ways to reconstruct that past, okay? So that is a very, very important topic which you should understand. I'm very sure you already have a lot of understanding. So I'm not going to dictate, but you should definitely write as I am going to write on the whiteboard. So sources of history क्या क्या होंगे? What are the major sources of history which we should be aware about? Now historians mainly rely on written work. जहाँ पे भी written work available है, that is the most important source. But they do not trust on written record as it is mentioned there. They will try to match those written records from other written records. They will also try to match those written records from archaeological sources. So archaeology is again a very, very important source. So the very first source of history will be written work. Now in the context of ancient India, अच्छा by the way, जहाँ पे भी written work available नहीं है, wherever you do not have any written work, we use the term prehistory. So the very first thing I discussed is prehistory. So when you do not have written work available, your main source is archaeology only, then you use the term prehistory. Now there is another term which you should know here is, and I'm going to talk about this term here, is called proto-history. So I'm going to divide prehistory period, proto-history period, and then of course historical period. So when you use the word historical period, it simply means जहाँ पे हमारे पास written records हैं, and those written records have survived, and these written records are useful to reconstruct the history. Prehistory basically means that you do not have written records. But proto-history is a term, it can mean different things. For example, it can mean that mention about a certain set of people, they did not write themselves, but they are being mentioned in other sources. Just a very good example can be that Greeks were attacked by many tribes of which roamed around in Central Asia. And these tribes did not write their own history, but that history is actually recorded in Greek accounts. So that is a type of proto-history, that they did not know, they did not write on themselves, but their record is mentioned in some other sources. But in India, it has a very specific meaning. In India, we do not use this definition. In India, the proto-history period hai, we use it for Indus Valley civilization. And the reason is very simple, that people of Indus Valley knew how to write. The only thing is that we have not deciphered it. We still do not know that what exactly did they write. So we have not been able to decipher their script. And because if we have not been able to decipher this script, we have no idea what exactly did they write. So the most important source to know about Indus Valley civilization is archaeological sources, not written records, because written records we have not deciphered. Hence the term proto-history is used in the Indian context for Indus Valley civilization. Is that clear? Right? So we have written works, we have written records, but we still have not deciphered the script, what exactly did they write. And archaeology becomes the most important source here. So hence the term proto-history. And wherever you have written work and you have deciphered it, that is what historical period is all about. So written work can be divided into many categories. I should also tell you that, can anyone tell me कि जिस तरीके से हम history पढ़ते हैं, which is the first textbook from India which can actually be considered as a work of history? Exactly, that is the best. So Raj Tarangani, written by Kalhan, which talks about the political development of Kashmir, and that book was written in 11th century. Now before 11th century, any textbook which talks about, let's say for example, different kings, it cannot be considered as a work of history. So this should be very clear that I'm going to mention lot of written records here. So written records here, written works here. Written works here mean that historians use them as a source of history. That does not mean that they themselves are a work of history. There should be, this differentiation should be very clear. So for example, the very first written work here is lot of religious work, lot of religious literature which developed during this period of time. The most important will be Vedas. Now I'm going to talk about Vedas in little detail जब हम Vedic age पढ़ेंगे. Now there are 4 Vedas, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sam Veda and Atharva Veda. And what this Vedic literature comprises of. So for example, this is a religious literature without any doubt. But at the same time, it does talk about various types of tribes. It does talk about important wars. It does talk about the geography of region. For example, it talks about rivers. It talks about mountains. It talks about religious practices. Right? It talks about position of women in the society. So all of these can be a very good work, very good source to know about the social, political or even economic development in a particular setup. So even though it is not a work of history, the written record in Vedas is useful to reconstruct ancient history. So Vedas are very important. Similarly, you also have many epics. For example, 2 most famous epics are Ramayana and Mahabharata. Now Ramayana and Mahabharata, again, these are religious literatures. They are not work of history per se. But for example, the places which are mentioned in Ramayana and Mahabharata, the kings and the kingdoms which are mentioned in Ramayana and Mahabharata, the tribes which are mentioned in Ramayana and Mahabharata, they have a historical basis. We do know that, in fact, many of those places even today are known by the same name. A lot of times names have changed, but a lot of times even names have remained the same. So epics, and again Ramayana and Mahabharata, जो सबसे initial Ramayana है, that was compiled by Valmiki. Exactly dating will be very difficult. Maybe it was compiled in, let's say, 6th century BC for the first time, even though it may have been part of very famous prose literature for many years, but on written record, on written work, it may have been compiled around 6th, 5th century BC. This is also very important. Similarly, Vedas. Vedas were part of let's say for example, जो पूरा Vedic literature है, how it was propagated. It was propagated from mouth to mouth. That people will teach their to disciple, they are going to teach to their disciples and so on. For the first time it may have been compiled around 6th or 5th century BC, but जो Vedic canon of literature, especially Rig Veda, it may have existed even thousands of years before. Okay? We still, frankly, we have no way of knowing how old, but we definitely know that it was part of a very famous tradition where knowledge was propagated from mouth to mouth, not on written work, right? So ये एक major difference clear होना चाहिए. Similarly, you have many types. Even in Ramayana, you have lot of developments which occurred. Similarly, in Mahabharata, which initially is attributed to Vedavyas, but lot of development occurred in later period of time. So, for example, in Valmiki Ramayana, Ram is a perfect person, but he is Maryada Purushottam, but he is not a god. But in, for example, let's say when Tulsidas writes Ramcharitmanas, during time when, in fact, Mughals were ruling India, Ram is incarnation of God. So by the way, this is not the first mention where Ram is incarnation of God. Ram as a god is even a much earlier literature. Ram has been portrayed as a god. But for Valmiki, he is Maryada Purushottam. So even in the development of Ramayana, you find that lot of things emerged in later period of time, which was not in the initial phases of time. And that actually tells you even how this developed. Historians can use this to understand what type of religious development is happening in the subcontinent region. Okay, so even epics are important sources of history. Even though themselves are not work of history, they can be used to reconstruct certain sections of certain parts of history. Similarly, you have a lot of Puranas, very, very important source. Puranas are very important source. So these are religious work, but even within religion you have lot of secular works. Secular works, for example, they do not exactly talk about gods and rituals, but for example, a very famous secular work which can be used to understand about ancient history is Dharma Shastras. Now Dharma Shastras are a book about, let's say, for example, the duty of different type of people. अच्छा, by the way, ये भी एक बहुत चीज clear होना चाहिए. The term dharma and religion are not exactly same. The religion जो हम modern context में use करते हैं, that a person is identified by their religious beliefs, it is very, very different from how the term dharma was used in ancient India. So dharma has much more moralistic orientation rather than a religious orientation. Dharma basically means that good behavior or moral behavior, right? What should constitute of good behavior? What an ideal person should be. These are the main elements of dharma rather than religion, which in fact is an important marker of identity. So Dharma Shastras, they are not exactly religious literature, they are secular literature. Secular literature in the sense that they do not talk about gods or rituals. They may talk about gods and rituals, but that is not the most important theme. Most important theme is कि moral obligations लोगों के क्या होने चाहिए, जो different section of society है उनके responsibilities क्या होने चाहिए. For example, it may talk about varna system in detail, that how people of different varnas should behave, people of different caste should behave. So to know about social history, religious history, Dharma Shastras are again a very, very important work, a very important source of history. So you get the idea that how we can use different written works to reconstruct history. Another very important work here will be Buddhist and Jain literature. I will again talk about the historical context in which Buddhism and Jainism emerged, but Buddhist and Jain literature is very useful to reconstruct ancient history. Because Buddhist and Jain literature in fact will be, a lot of times it will depart from जो earlier religious texts हैं, जैसे पुराणास हो गए या वेदास हो गए. So they will not, in fact, lot of things which were very popular in the society, जो Buddhism and Jainism है, they were very critical of that. So you do find an alternate perspective to understand history. So even Buddhist and Jain literature are very useful. Similarly, many regional languages, for example, apart from Sanskrit, acha, by the way, another very important source will be Sangam age, Sangam literature. So Sangam literature was compiled in Tamil Nadu. As the legend goes, Sangam was basically an assembly of poets which occurred in the ancient South India. So work of first and second assembly, they have not survived, but work of third assembly, that has survived, and work of that third assembly is very, very useful to again understand about history of South India. That what is happening in before Christ age, about 300, 4th century or 3rd century BC, and even till 3rd century or 4th century AD, what is happening in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, in southern part of the country. Sangam literature is a very, very important source. I will talk about Sangam literature in detail जब हम Sangam age discuss करेंगे, like what it comprises of, what are the main books, main works which you should aware about. So apart from all this, by the way, many regional languages, for example, you do find emergence of Kannada or Telugu, which occurred even in early medieval period. In fact, Kannada is a very old language. So जो first poems in Kannada hai, they of course emerged much later, but Kannada as a language perhaps was much earlier language. Same goes to Telugu also. So we do find some early literature or some early inscriptions written in these languages, regional languages. They are also very useful to reconstruct ancient history. But another very important source here is that many foreigners came to India. And account of foreigners are a very, very useful source of history. And the reason is that foreigners will not just write about kings or political developments. They will also talk about what type of society is. Like what are people eating, what are they wearing. If they find something interesting, they are going to describe it. So for example, many foreigners who came to India, they were very mesmerized by elephants, that elephants have been domesticated. And many foreigners write about elephants. Similarly, they are mesmerized by a lot of spices which were available in India. Lot of things, for example, pan was very popular for many foreign travelers. That something like pan exists into India. So account of foreign travelers is again a very, very important source. So we have, for example, the first major source is a person named Megasthenes, who was ambassador of Seleucus Nicator. Now Seleucus Nicator was one of the commanders of Alexander. Alexander, I am very sure, sabko pata hoga ki who was Alexander. So one of the commander of Alexander was Seleucus Nicator, who had settled in the northwest frontier, in the region of Pakistan, Afghanistan. And Seleucus had attacked Patliputra, but he was defeated and he was forced into a peace treaty. And one of the ambassadors of Seleucus Nicator was placed in the court of Chandragupta Maurya. So his name was Megasthenes, and Megasthenes writes a very famous book called Indica. So Indica jo hai, that talks about India in detail. He traveled extensively he did not only just settle into Patliputra, he in fact went as far as Kerala. So he traveled to the entire country and wrote about India in detail in his account Indica, right? So that is a very important source. Similarly, you have many other travelers like Fahian or Xuanzang who came to Fahian came during time of Chandragupta II. Xuanzang came when Harshvardhan was ruling, right? Similarly, you have Al-Biruni who came to India in 10th or 11th century. So Al-Biruni, even though he came during early medieval period, but Al-Biruni found he stayed in India for about 17, 18 years. He learned Sanskrit and he found many scriptures which have not survived today. But Al-Biruni found those scriptures, and based on that he mentions all of these scriptures and about India in detail in his account. A very famous book called Kitab al-Hind. So that is again a very important source to know about ancient India. So account of foreign travelers. So these are some major written works. By the way, all of the topics which we are going to discuss, especially the major topics, I am going to talk about what are the major sources even in more detail. Ye bina sources ko samjhe hue, that if I am talking about someone or any type of particular development, then what is the historical basis to that? So we are going to talk about details of all of these sources. For example, we will talk about Buddhist literature, kya hai exactly, or Jain literature kya hai. So we will definitely talk about the details of these sources before discussing some major topics. So anyways, written work is a very, very important source. The second major source is archaeology. Now archaeology is very, very useful to understand the material culture of any society, but it of course cannot tell you about the political development. It also cannot tell you, it cannot also answer a lot of questions which we often ask in history. For example, why something declined or why something emerged. ये सारे questions के answer आपको नहीं मिलेंगे. जहाँ पे written work नहीं है, there archaeology is the most important source, of course, without any doubt. But even where written works are available, archaeology is a very useful source because often historians will try to find the justification mentioned in the written work. Let's say, for example, in a work, an ancient city has been described with large fortifications. So if you actually find remnant of those fortifications by archaeological sources, then you can come to a conclusion that whatever is mentioned there was actually correct. Right? So archaeology is a very, very important source. However, at some point of time, there are often departures from the written work, what written works are mentioning and what archaeology is actually telling you. And historians, that becomes very again headache for historians, that how do you reconcile these two things together? Because historians often rely on written work a lot. And there is a very good chance that written work जो है वो बहुत correct नहीं होगा. तो ये जो है reconcile करना बहुत मुश्किल होता है. But thankfully ancient work has been, it's a development which has occurred for last more than 100 years. So lot of conflicting questions, they have been answered by historians. So archaeology is a very, very important source. Another very important source is epigraphy. Now epigraphy basically means to understand about ancient inscriptions. Lot of kings often, their achievements, they often inscribed those things on stone pillars, on caves or on pillars. So for example, understanding about what exactly did they write. So it will include a lot of things. It include archaeology also. For example, a lot of times you do need to dig things. It also includes linguistics. Linguistics basically means is to understand about languages. Now language basically include two things. This is very important. Often students get confused. Language has always been there. Human beings have always known how to speak, but how to write, that is entirely a different thing. So for example, I can speak in a language, but I can write that language into various types. And the method which I use and the rules and regulations I follow to write, that is what script is. So when I'm saying script and when I'm saying language, these are two different things. So for example, I can write Sanskrit either in Roman script, in Devanagari also, and in past, to write Sanskrit, people used Brahmi. Right? So script and language, these are two different things. In today's time, we are using Devanagari script or Roman script, right? But language, you can write same language into different script. So ये जो difference है script और language का बहुत clear होना चाहिए. So epigraphy does include, you have to decipher ancient inscriptions. So it does include a lot of things, some elements of archaeology, some element of linguistic, combine all of them. Some, in fact, it is also a type of written work, right? Even though it is not available on a book, but it is a type of written work also. So it does include a lot of things together. Another very important source is numismatics. What is numismatics? Study of coins. Now numismatics is very, very useful to understand the economic history. So for example, कोई prosperous kingdom अगर होगा तो वहाँ पे जो coins होंगे, बहुत ज़्यादा coins हमको मिलेंगे. Depending upon how pure those coins are. For example, we find that during Kushana period जो gold है, वो सबसे pure gold था. सबसे best gold जो मिलता है from anywhere, that was found during Kushana period. Right? जैसे I will give you a very interesting anecdote here, that you do know Tanishq as a brand. Now the reason Tanishq is because the greatest Kushana king was Kanishk, and because Kanishk used the best quality of gold, so that actually gives you the name Tanishq. T is Tata basically, so it is a product of Tata. So Kushanas, and by the way, even Kushanas, even though they had the best quality of gold, more number of gold were issued by Gupta Empire. So we can conclude that it was a very prosperous empire. So it is very important to understand the economic status of one particular kingdom or one particular region. But it can also tell you about the trade relationship. For example, if you find, let's say, Roman coins into India, what does it tell you? That there is some sort of trade relationship which existed in ancient period, right? At some cases, it can also be useful to know about the political history. Now, this is also interesting. Coins आपको political history कैसे बताएंगे? तो क्या होता था कि lot of times when one king was defeated, their coins were captured, and often kings used coins with their some मार्कर, कोई उनका अपना एक मार्कर होगा, अपना कुछ उनका एक सिंबल होगा, कोई रॉयल सिंबल होगा, जैसे किंग का इमेज ही हो गया मान लो. So often a king who has been defeated, and if those coins are captured by the victorious king, then it was often restruck that he is going to use his own mark, his own significance, and now they were issued. And that leaves a trace. जो older mark है versus newer mark है, that leaves a trace. So this restrucking of coin is useful sometimes to understand the political development in subcontinent region. So at least at few cases it does talk about, it does tell you about the political development also, and I will give you those examples. But even though very, very useful for economic history, trade relationship, prosperity, it can be useful also for political development. And last but not the least, especially for ancient India, or in fact for ancient world, a new source which has emerged in last decade. In fact, you are not going to find about this source in R.S. Sharma or even in Upinder Singh, but it has emerged as a very, very important source, which is called population genetics. Now what population genetics? Population genetics is basically a branch of genetics. Genetics in itself is a branch of biology. The goal of population genetics is to understand how one population, one group of population are connected with each other, and also how one group of population is connected to another group of population. So it is very useful to understand the ancestry. Just for example, many questions have been very debatable in India. Just where did peoples of Harappa come from? Or did Aryans originate in India, or they came from outside? So there was a very famous theory, which in fact I'm going to discuss this, that how this became a very politically contentious theory, that Aryan invaded India. Now this theory has been rejected by modern historians, that there was no invasion. But even today there is a debate that did they migrate or did they originate in India? Right? So population genetics tells you that migration has a much higher percentage, that they may have migrated from Central Asian steppe region to India. And we can actually understand the migration pattern, that from where they originated and where they actually went, using population genetics. So it has been a very, very powerful idea, very useful idea, and frankly, because it has a scientific basis to it, it is not based on historians' personal opinion or where your personal ideology lies. It is very useful. Just for example, I was actually reading that जो पूरा caste marriage है, कि within caste जो marriage होगा, that emerged, in fact जो geneticists हैं, they have been able to answer that question, that when does that start in India? It starts in about 1st century AD. So even though, so for example, you may think that with coming of Aryans, ये जो पूरा caste है और caste marriages हैं, that will be popular, but Aryans came to India in 1500 BC, and more than 1000 years later, in 1st century AD, you have this caste marriage which becomes very prevalent. So even such type of questions have been answered using population genetics. So a very, very important source to study history. Okay? Chalo, so these are the major sources. I'm going to talk about, as we discuss more and more topics, I'm going to further elaborate on these sources, that how they are useful, and for prelims or mains examination, what are the important things which you should remember. So the very first topic I'm going to start is, give the heading prehistoric period. Hanji. What about? So manuscripts जो है वो written records का ही part है. So जो भी ancient work जो survive होता है, for example, जो Vedas का जो original form है, whatever has survived, that has survived in the form of manuscripts. So that is in fact a very important part of written work. Right? Hanji. So Manusmriti will be type of, for example, जो बहुत सारा जो secular literature है, so not exactly part of Dharma Shastras, but lot of secular literature which talks about, let's say, the social, how society should be organized. So that will be part of social secular literature. So जो धर्म शास्त्र जो मैंने यहाँ पे लिखा है, इसी में further I can use Manusmriti. Right, so many other works. So these are all written works which can be useful to understand about ancient history. Anyways, Hanji. What are the sources of? ओके ओके, दैट्स अ वेरी गुड क्वेश्चन. आपका हिस्ट्री ऑप्शनल है? तो फिर अगर हिस्ट्री ऑप्शनल है तो देयर इज अ वेरी गुड टेक्स्ट बुक कॉल्ड अर्ली इंडियंस रिटन बाय टोनी जोसेफ. यू कैन रीड दैट. जिसका नहीं है उसको पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है अभी. आप एग्जाम क्लियर हो जाए उसके बाद पढ़ना. बहुत ही अच्छी किताब है. आई थिंक वन शुड डेफिनेटली स्टडी दैट बुक. बट इफ यू हैव हिस्ट्री एज एन ऑप्शनल, यू कैन रेफर टू अर्ली इंडियंस रिटन बाय टोनी जोसेफ. दैट अ वेरी वेरी ब्यूटीफुल रिटन बुक. Before I start the topic, one thing which should be very clear, that I often ask this question, that why should we study history? Why do we study history? And I'm going to ask this question from this batch also. Why should we study history? And don't give me answer कि UPSC में syllabus में है. मतलब हाँ ठीक है, I know that कि आपके UPSC syllabus में. हाँ जी. To know about? To know about our past mistakes. We can learn from history. The main point is that we can learn from history, right? Just for example, there is a very famous quote by George Bernard Shaw that history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. You'll find that there are elements which are very similar throughout the history. So I think that is a very valid point, that we try to understand the mistakes of our past. What can be other reasons? To understand, I think that in itself is quite interesting, right? That curiosity in itself for me is a very important reason that we should study history. That how our ancestors survived. For example, we take a lot of things for granted. जैसे for example, we do not bother about that we are going to get our next meal. हमको मिल जाएगा. हमको पता है कि we are going to get our next meal. But think about our ancestors who lived thousands of years ago and they did not know if they are going to get their next meal or not. So how they lot of things we take for granted, but how people survived in the past, and how in fact that survival. So for example, we do know that initially people were hunter gatherers, and from hunting gathering you have these large empires, and now you have this entire democratic setup and all of those things which we have now, technological developments, which we take a lot of those things granted. But how that evolution occurred, I think curiosity in itself is very, very important to understand history. And it actually tells you empathy. It teaches you empathy, that you try to empathize with things. You do not take things for granted. You try to understand the problems of different section of people. And you also try to understand that you are privileged. You are living in the best period of history. Remember that. No matter how difficult your life seem, कि life बहुत tough है, बहुत दुनिया खराब है, जो भी है, बिलीव मी, आपके पेरेंट्स, जैसे हमेशा ही होता है कि आप किसी से बात करोगे, आप ओल्डर लोगों से, तो बोलेंगे कि बड़ा अच्छा था हमारा पीरियड. लाइक ऑफन पीपल reminiscing their golden period, and the reason is very simple. We often try to remember the good things, we forget bad things. But believe me, we are living in the best period of history, because in past there was a chance that you are not going to get your next meal. If you are suffering from a smaller infection, you are going to die. But कोई और बीच में solution भी नहीं है, because there is no medicine available also. So history also tells you a lot of empathy. अच्छा, before I start this topic, one thing I should be very, very clear, that I do know that all of us have some fair understanding of history, because how we, even in our households, lot of historical discussions may have occurred by our parents. In your schools also, teachers may have taught you history. So there are a lot of biases which we inculcate as we grow up. So for example, we try to एक बड़ा famous एक psychology में एक term होता है जिसको हम बोलते हैं confirmation bias. Now confirmation bias basically means is that you try to pick data based on your beliefs. जैसे I believe in something, and based on that belief, आपको जो डेटा आपके बिलीफ को फर्दर स्ट्रेंथन करता है, यू आर गोइंग टू पिक दैट डेटा एंड यू आर गोइंग टू रिजेक्ट अदर डेटा जो आपके बिलीफ को स्ट्रेंथन नहीं करता. दिस इज वेरी, फॉर एग्जांपल, लेट्स से आई बिलीव इन डेथ पेनाल्टी, एंड आई विल गिव यू टू स्टडीज. एक स्टडी बोलता है कि डेथ पेनाल्टी से क्राइम कम होता है, और एक स्टडी बोलता है कि डेथ पेनाल्टी से क्राइम पे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. आई एम गोइंग टू रिलाई ऑन दी फर्स्ट स्टडी इफ आई बिलीव इन डेथ पेनाल्टी. सो दैट इज अ टिपिकल केस ऑफ कन्फर्मेशन बायस. बट ओवरकमिंग, एंड बाय द वे, बायस सबके अंदर होता है, इसमें कोई, एंड इसको रिकॉग्नाइज करना बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, that we all have our biases because of our socialization, because of our upbringing. But being aware about those biases is very, very important, that you have those biases. So history also teaches you critical thinking, that history is not going to include things which you think how things should have evolved. So for example, historians, I do know that historians also have their biases. They are going to look at things from a certain perspective. You may not agree with those biases, and that is totally fine. But be critical about it, that why you do not agree with those biases, why you do not agree with that particular assertion. But that should not mean without actually looking at the arguments, you have outrightly rejected the idea, right? So this is also very, very important, that history teaches you critical thinking, okay? And it may, in fact, from time to time, it can lead to some sort of cognitive dissonance. That is, I'm going to say a few things which may not align with your whatever beliefs. Please, apne phone ko silent karke rakh lo. Which may not align with all the belief system you have grown up to. And there will be a lot of things, I will be saying things like that. And you basically have to understand that there is a basis to it. That if I'm saying something, there is a basis to it. Okay? So a lot of things, it may become, in fact, history can be an emotive issue. It does generate a lot of emotions. It can generate a lot of emotions, but we are here to learn. We are here to broaden our horizon. We do not have to, let's say, for example, think in terms of very contracted point of view. We have to, and that is again, I have that last point, that it does broaden your horizon. So on all that note, give this heading, prehistoric period. Prehistoric period. Okay, so in prehistoric period, the key idea of prehistoric period is prehistoric period basically means that you do not have written records. Archaeology is the most important source. And identifying how humans evolved in prehistoric period is a very, very challenging task. And for that, we do use a lot of tools. Archaeology is, of course, an important tool, but we also use geography as a very important tool. For example, we try to understand the climate of the past. We try to understand how rivers may have changed their course from time to time, and how that changing of river course may have impacted evolution of human beings. How changing of climate may have impacted evolution of human beings. So we try to inculcate geological data, climatic data, and even genetics data to understand about past, right? So for example, जो पूरा prehistoric period है, it can be divided mainly into 3 categories. And prehistoric period mainly is classified on the basis of 3 criteria. First, which geological period you are talking about. Second, what is your, what type of tools you are using. So for example, people are hunter and gatherers. Most of the time they are hunting animals and they are gathering stuff. Or they are gathering fruits and vegetables also, which is found in the wild, right? And third is, what is their subsistence basis? Subsistence basis means that how they are surviving. So there is a term I'm using here, subsistence. Subsistence simply means that आपका जो survival है वो किस चीज पे dependent है. So based on these 3 criterias, you can divide prehistoric period into 3 ages. The first is called Paleolithic age, the second is called Mesolithic age, and the third is called Neolithic age. So in Paleolithic age, you have lithic, by the way, means tools. Paleo means old. Okay, so we are talking about stone tools as they were present. For example, our ancestors may have found tools lying here and there. They may have used those tools to kill animals, but those tools were not sharpened enough. They were in a very rough shape as they found. They did not do any invention. They did not do any modification there, but they did use those tools for hunting and gathering, right? So lithic means stone. We do not have any evidence of agriculture at this period of time. We also do not have evidence of domestication of animals at this period of time. Human beings mainly lived either in caves. Caves, in fact, is the most because caves provided you shelter. They stayed from one place. They did not, in fact, settle at one particular location. They keep shifting from one location to another location in the hunt of food. They often preferred to live near the river because river is a natural water source, and also it can be useful for transportation, right? So all of these things are important elements of Paleolithic phase, the first prehistoric period. And we find Paleolithic sites into India across the country. कि पैलियोलिथिक साइट्स जो है करीब करीब पूरे कंट्री में आपको पैलियोलिथिक साइट्स मिलते हैं. आई एम गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट सम इंपॉर्टेंट रीजंस जो आर्कियोलॉजिस्ट के लिए बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, बट ओनली इन नियोलिथिक साइट एंड चाल्कोलिथिक साइट आपको रीजंस याद रखने की जरूरत है. इन केस ऑफ पैलियोलिथिक तो बिल्कुल रीजन याद रखने की जरूरत नहीं है. मेसोलिथिक में देयर आर सम साइट्स एंड आई एम गोइंग टू हाईलाइट दैट व्हाट आर दोज साइट्स व्हिच आर यूजफुल एंड व्हाई, व्हाट एग्जैक्टली शुड यू रिमेंबर फ्रॉम दैट. सो दैट विल स्टार्ट फ्रॉम मेसोलिथिक, बट राइट डाउन फ्यू थिंग्स हियर. We can classify the Indian Stone Age. Give the heading prehistoric period and write down. We can classify the Indian Stone Age. We can classify the Indian Stone Age in three ages. In three ages, on the basis of geological age, on the basis of geological age, stone tools, geological age, stone tools, and subsistence basis. Subsistence, I will repeat, basically means survival basis. कि आपका survival basis क्या है? We can divide prehistoric period in three phases. We can divide prehistoric period in three phases. In three phases: Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. Give the heading Paleolithic age. Paleolithic age. It can be further divided into lower Paleolithic, it can be further divided into lower Paleolithic. You can mention the timeline also. Depending upon आप क्या source पढ़ रहे हो, it can have different timelines, especially जो starting period है, that can be different. End period it's same. So starting period can be as early as 2 million years ago, and it will end at 100,000 BC. So it in fact covers the largest period of human history. So lower Paleolithic. Middle Paleolithic will be from about 100,000 to 40,000 BC, and upper Paleolithic is about from 40,000 to 10,000 BC. Write down here. Early life started, next bullet point. Early life started at the foothills of mountains early life started at the foothills of mountains where the river was narrow, where the river was narrow and was easy to cross compared to plains, was easy to cross compared to plains. Rivers also provided a steady source of water, easy to cross compared to plains. Rivers also provided steady source of water, steady source of water. Caves were, next bullet point, caves were the natural places for residence. Caves were the natural places for residence. Residence. The man survived on hunting animals. The man survived on hunting animals and gathering food. The man survived on hunting animals and gathering foods. Different varieties of stone tools were used. Different varieties of stone tools were used. Which became smaller and refined with time. Which became smaller and refined with time. And एक last point लिख लेना. Which became smaller and refined with time. Just write down last point. We find Paleolithic locations across the country. We find Paleolithic locations across the country. For example, Sohan River Valley in Punjab. Sohan River Valley in Punjab. Next, comma. Leader River Valley in Kashmir. Leader River Valley in Kashmir. Next. Nagaur district in Rajasthan. Nagaur in Rajasthan. Munger and Rajgir in Bihar. Munger and Rajgir in Bihar. Bhimbetka. Munger and Rajgir in Bihar. Bhimbetka in Madhya Pradesh. Now Bhimbetka is a very very important site. एक site जो पता होना चाहिए. We find Bhimbetka has a settlement even in Paleolithic age, in Mesolithic age, and even in Neolithic age we do find Bhimbetka settlement. So especially for Mesolithic age, Bhimbetka is very very important. Right? So this is perhaps one site which you should be aware about. Kurnool and Chittoor in Andhra Pradesh. Kurnool and Chittoor in Andhra Pradesh. Chittoor, Kurnool and Chittoor in Andhra Pradesh. and Palvaram in Tamil Nadu. Give the heading Mesolithic Age. Let's take a break here. After the break, we will talk about Mesolithic, Neolithic. But जो major topic आज के class का होगा वो Indus Valley Civilization ही होगा. Hello. Hello. अभी किन्होंने पूछा था कि धीरे डिक्टेट करने को? Who asked that? Somebody did ask कि sir fast. अच्छा आपने करा. I do not want you to feel why I rejected your request like outrightly. So the reason is very simple that you have to. So I will dictate a little slow, but you also need to increase your speed. And the reason is very simple because you have to write 20 answers in 3 hours. So for example, if you go and see the mains paper, you have the first 10 questions of 10 marks and next 10 question of 15 marks. So you get basically 6 minutes to write 150 words for one question and 9 minutes to write 250 words for next जो 15 marks से question है. And इसमें सोचना भी है आपको उसी में. So you have to think, you have to like understand, you have to make up a structure and then you have to start writing. Okay. So you need to increase your writing speed also. However, initially, as for example, as early as possible start writing answer, but initially do not bother about time limit frankly. आप आराम से शुरू के जो आंसर है टाइम लेके लिखो. अगर 10 marks का क्वेश्चन है take 15 minutes, 15 marks का क्वेश्चन है take 20 minutes. So initially focus on the quality, but gradually you do need to focus upon like attempting more and more number of questions in limited amount of time. So I will dictate a little bit slow, but you also need to increase your writing speed a little bit, right? Anyways, so when I mentioned stone tools, just to give you a brief perspective, by the way, I was talking about the number of questions from ancient, modern and art and culture. जैसे इस बार देखो 2021 में there are 4 questions from ancient, 5 from medieval and 3 questions from art and culture, and there were 5 questions from modern history also. Similarly, last year there were 4 from ancient, 2 from medieval, 4 from art and culture. So this is a trend that in fact at some time you also have like one question, just one question from ancient, one question from medieval also, but then 5 or 6 questions from art and culture. So they will keep increasing the weightage of one section of this syllabus, or but that doesn't mean कि जैसे मान लो अगर एक क्वेश्चन ही आ रहा है तो इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि पढ़ेंगे ही नहीं हम, तो वो तो बिल्कुल लक वाली बात है कि एक क्वेश्चन आ गया. But what if there are 5-6 questions? जैसे I remember people do not study art and culture much because उससे पहले art and culture के 2 या 3 क्वेश्चन आते थे. I remember in 2014 paper suddenly there were I think 9 questions from art and culture, and that is a shock for. So try to prepare yourself for all type of shocks which UPSC can give you. I was talking about different sources, literary sources, archaeological sources, epigraphy. Epigraphy, somebody was asking on online portal. Epigraphy is basically studying of inscriptions. Lot of kings often used inscriptions to propagate their idea, as well as many inscriptions in form of prashasti. Prashasti basically means eulogy. That king is being praised for his bravery or for his other work also. So many prashastis are found across the country for different kingdoms. Numismatics and population genetics, as I was talking about. Prehistory, protohistory, what exactly prehistory is? Protohistory basically means Indus Valley civilization in the context of India, and the reason is very simple, that you have written record but you have not been able to decipher it. Anyways, I was talking about Paleolithic sites. We find Paleolithic sites across the country. I have taken these maps from Upinder Singh textbook, so I do not feel that you need to like memorize any location from prehistory, especially from Paleolithic site here. Early Mesolithic sites of India, we find that also. And then you of course have early centers of agriculture in Indian subcontinent. Now this map here is important. I'm going to get this slide uploaded on your student portal. This map here is important, that जो early sites of agriculture हैं, जहाँ पे सबसे पहले agriculture subcontinent में शुरू होता है. For example, if you look at few places like Mehergarh or Sambar Didwana or Mahagara, these are some of Mahagara is in fact a place where rice cultivation, not only in subcontinent but across the world, for the first time we find evidence of rice cultivation in Mahagara. So ये कुछ जो important settlements हैं from early agriculture, they are important. And I will again show, इस map में आप क्या याद रखोगे, like entire country has Paleolithic sites. And the reason is very simple, because it covers the largest period of human history. Anyways, I was talking about stone tools. So just to give you a rough idea that what type of stone tools we are talking about. जैसे Paleolithic stone tools. You have chopping tool or pebble hand axe or cleavers. Now these are not very like refined stone tools. These are stone tools as it has been found. Perhaps some refinement may have occurred, but more or less they are not very refined. But if you go and see the Mesolithic age, now Mesolithic age is the marker of Mesolithic age hai, that is our next topic. That is a type of stone tools called microliths. Now micro means very small and finished. So stone tools were now given different shape. So for example, जो front of arrow होगा or spear होगा, that will be given. So we are going to use a very sharpened stone tool so that it can pierce animal skin very easily, even if the animal is huge or dangerous. So much more refined stone tools known as microliths, they became very popular in the Mesolithic age. Now this is the distinguishing feature of Mesolithic age compared to Paleolithic age, that you have refined stone tools known as microlith. So just write down few things here. Give the heading Mesolithic age. Now Mesolithic age, you can give the time period from 10,000 BC to 6,000 BC. From 10,000 BC to 6,000 BC. 10,000 to 6,000 BC. Now there are many things about Mesolithic age which you should know. For example, the first evidence of agriculture or the first set of domestication of animals, that starts popping up in Mesolithic age. Even in Paleolithic age, you do find some elements of artistic expression by human beings, but that artistic expression became further developed in Mesolithic age. As for example, the best example is Bhimbetka ke jo caves hain. If you go to Bhimbetka caves, you find these paintings inside the caves, and even today they have survived. And you basically see that these paintings depict hunting scenes or some sort of celebration is happening, where people are dancing and there is some sort of musical instrument. So all of these things are depicted inside the cave. So artistic expression became better. In ancient history, another very interesting thing to know about beliefs of people is what they did with their dead body. So for example, in Paleolithic phase, you find that dead body, as people died, they were left around. There was no investment per se in their burial, or there is any sacrificial ritual जो है वो involved नहीं है. But in Mesolithic age, we do find that early evidence of burial is found at some locations from here and there. So burial basically means that people are trying to give respect to their dead. And later it turns out, just for example, जब हम और आगे देखेंगे, we will see that how burials have a very important religious significance. That there are some preparations that someone who has died, they will need some help in their afterlife. So a lot of times, for example, many other things were buried along with the dead people, that maybe all of these things will be useful in afterlife. And by the way, this idea can be as simple as burying few things, or it can be as complicated as erecting an entire pyramid, which Egypt is known for, right? So for example, the central theme जो है पूरा pyramid of Egypt है, is this, that when Pharaoh died, you had all these riches, even many people who were buried with Pharaoh, that it is going to be helpful in the afterlife. So it actually tells you जो burial analysis है, इसको mortuary analysis बहुत बार बोलते हैं. Mortuary analysis can tell you about the religious belief of people, where you have no written record. And sometimes it can also tell you about the social demarcation. For example, someone who is very rich, वहाँ पे जो मिलेगा बहुत सारे हो सकता है कि necklaces मिल जाएं, या for example more resources will be part of the burial system, while someone who is not very rich. So if you do find those type of mortuary जहाँ पे बहुत सारे resources, बहुत सारे material things हैं as part of the dead body, that does tell you that there is some sort of social demarcation here. So even mortuary analysis can be used by historians to understand about what type of society we are talking about. So anyways, write down few things here. This age is marked by the use of microliths. This age is marked by the use of microliths, smaller and finer stone tools, smaller and finer stone tools used for hunting. This age is marked by use of microliths, smaller and finer stone tools used for hunting of animals. The environmental condition during this period became warmer. The environmental condition during this period became warmer and thus more suitable for human life. Thus more suitable for human life. Hunting and gathering remained the primary economic activity. So the earlier point was that environmental condition during this period became warmer, making it more suitable for human life. End of ice age. Geography में आपको ice age के बारे में डिटेल में पढ़ाएंगे. That this ice age is a very very important feature of geological period. So in Mesolithic period, an ice age is now coming to an end. So climate started becoming warmer and more suitable for human beings. So Paleolithic में क्या लिखा था हमने? एक term था geological age. Geological age is also very important criteria to basically divide stone to divide this lithic phase, prehistoric phase. Write down the next bullet point. Hunting and gathering remained the primary economic activity. Hunting and gathering remained the primary, let's not use the word economic, use subsistence. Hunting and gathering remained the primary mode of subsistence. Hunting and gathering remained the primary mode of subsistence. However, early evidence of agriculture as well as domestication of animals such as sheep, goat, cattle, and dogs are found. The man started constructing, write down, the man, next bullet point, the man started constructing artificial homes. The man started constructing artificial homes made of bamboo and grass. Made of bamboo and grass. Artificial homes made of bamboo and grass. Next bullet point. We find evidence of burial practices. We find evidence of burial practices. Burial practices from Mesolithic phase. From Mesolithic phase. Mesolithic phase. एंड एक लास्ट बुलेट पॉइंट लिख लेना, the artistic expression of human beings, the artistic expression of human beings became much more expressive. The artistic expression of human beings became much more expressive, became much more expressive important Mesolithic sites. Important Mesolithic sites are as following. Important Mesolithic sites are as following. As following. One of the largest Mesolithic site is found in Rajasthan, in Bagaur, Rajasthan. Bagaur in Rajasthan. Next is rock shelters of Mirzapur in Uttar Pradesh. रॉक शेल्टर्स ऑफ मिर्ज़ापुर उत्तर प्रदेश. इनफैक्ट ये जो अभी हमने एक पहले लाइन लिखा था, दैट द फर्स्ट एविडेंस ऑफ बरियल, दैट इज एक्चुअली फाउंड इन इंडिया इन मिर्ज़ापुर उत्तर प्रदेश. भिमबेटका इन मध्य प्रदेश. Very famous for its cave paintings which belong to both Mesolithic as well as Neolithic phase. And just to give you a brief context here, that what type of cave painting I am talking about. So many of these paintings from Bhimbetka, most of these paintings are from Bhimbetka frankly. And they do, although I have mentioned here Neolithic art, but some of those paintings are also from Mesolithic period. So we have, like this, for example, celebration scene or cattle rearing, some sort of hunting also. So we do find all these evidences, all these artistic expressions from early settlers. Next, Lakhudiyar caves in Uttarakhand. Lakhudiyar caves in Uttarakhand. Langhnaj in Gujarat. In Gujarat. And give the next heading, Neolithic phase. Neolithic age. Now Neolithic age is from 6000 BC to 3000 BC. 3000. Now there are some remarkable features of Neolithic phase which you should know. For example, अभी तक Mesolithic phase में क्या था? Which Paleolithic phase? ये तो लिखा है, discuss किया था हमने. So if you are talking about lower Paleolithic age, it can start from 2 million years ago till 100,000 BC. Then from 100,000 to 40,000 BC, that is middle Paleolithic age, and the upper Paleolithic age will be from 100,000 BC to 40,000 BC. So we talked about this. Sorry, from 10,000 BC to 6,000 BC. nahi, 40,000 to 10,000 BC. Anyways, 10,000 to 6,000 was Mesolithic phase. Anyways, Neolithic age, there are some remarkable features of Neolithic phase which should be very clear, that it talks about abhi tak subsistence kya hai? Hunting and gathering. Even though we have evidence of agriculture, the major subsistence activity is hunting and gathering. Now there is a shift here, that hunting and gathering may have played a very important role, but it is not the most important subsistence economic activity. Agriculture becomes the most important economic activity. So early villages, some sort of settlement, people rather than moving from one place to another place, now people have settled into one location. It leads to formation of early villages. For example, the very first village which emerged in Indian subcontinent is a village called Mehergarh, which emerged in Balochistan province of Pakistan. कि अभी जो Balochistan है, there is a province in Pakistan called Balochistan, and a village called Mehergarh emerged in the Neolithic phase here. That is the first village of Indian subcontinent region, and we then find villages, such type of village settlement in many other part of the country also. We do find that agriculture has become the most important economic subsistence activity. We find evidence of pottery. Lot of potteries are now being developed by human beings for storing grain. We also find burial practices have in fact taken some sort of religious symbolism is here. That dead body, for example, there is a very famous place in Jammu and Kashmir known as Barzoham. In Barzoham you find a burial that the master along with his dog, so master and dog both are found in the same burial. Let's assume that both of them died at the same time. Otherwise it's a tragic story. So anyways, so we find such type of things. These are the remarkable features of Neolithic phase. Often it is called Neolithic revolution. So we use a term Neolithic revolution because of all these things. That first type of human settlement, agriculture, from hunting and gathering, settlement to agriculture, development of pottery, development of some sort of religious ideas. All of these things are features of Neolithic age, and hence often it is called Neolithic revolution. तो बहुत बार Neolithic revolution हम term use करते हैं. Now देखो, एक जो human पूरा development है ना, human beings का development, it also has occurred because of many coincidences. जैसे we may think that because things are happening for so long, maybe this is a linear progression, but frankly this is not a linear progression. From time to time, जैसे for example, let's say because of some sort of hybridization, a new rice crop emerged जिसका productivity बहुत ज़्यादा है. That hybridization, some sort of mutation may have occurred, and suddenly rice cultivation occurred on a much larger scale, right? तो ये first metal which was discovered. Again, so for example, copper was the first metal which was discovered, which is called Chalcolithic age. I will talk about Chalcolithic age later. But it does give you a rough idea that often we think of human progress in terms of linear progression, but there are spikes. Let's say for example, if I can plot the progression, even though progression is I cannot quantify it, but if I can plot the progression as a quantifiable criteria, there will be spikes here and there, and those spikes are very, very important to understand about human evolution. Climate suddenly became suitable. You have a crop variety जिसका production बहुत high है, and because of that, agriculture which was a subsistence, and this is very, very important, now leads to agricultural surplus. And when there is an agricultural surplus, that agricultural surplus is going to give you other type of economic activity. Without agricultural surplus, you cannot imagine any other type of economic activity. So the moment there are few people who are enough to produce for most of the settlement, now other people can enter into other type of economic activity. Then there will also be a realization, and by the way, that realization was also even before this settlement, that we do need some sort of rules and regulations. So we have to assume that even when hunter and gatherers were there, when they are hunting from one place to another place, they must have followed certain protocol for survival, that how they are going to survive, that there will be a chain of command. There is a person who, let's not use the word king, but let's say who is a chief, and the command of chief is very, very important. They also may have some sort of protocol, जैसे मान लो अगर कोई danger है तो women and children को हमको पहले save करना है, हो सकता है ऐसा कुछ protocol हो. तो same type of things, that we do need certain type of rules and protocols. Same type of similar settlement, but with many, many modifications may have occurred in proper human settlements now. Now we are not moving from one place to another place. We have established ourselves to one village. In that village there is agricultural surplus. Because of that agricultural surplus, there will be many other type of economic activity that is not limited to agriculture. Let's say for example craft tradition ho gaya, artists ho gaye, merchants ho gaye, traders ho gaye. All of these are different economic activity which will emerge. There will be a realization at this point of time that we do need a much more well established rules and regulations. So for example, that will lead to emergence of a political class also, that there is going to be some sort of administrative setup, some governance setup. There will be a ruling class. What type of ruling arrangement will be, that is an entirely separate issue. But definitely there will be a ruling class, there will be some sort of governance mechanism that will emerge, and all of this will occur from agricultural surplus. That is the primary sine qua non जिसको हम बोलते हैं. It is a prerequisite of any other type of development. Before that you do require agricultural surplus. Hence Neolithic phase को हम बहुत बार Neolithic revolution बोलते हैं. That without that other things would not have been possible. Okay, so just write down this thing and I will continue this discussion which I am mentioning. Just write down this thing. Neolithic age marks the beginning of food production. Beginning of food production. That is, Neolithic age marks the beginning of food production. That is, there is a shift from, there is a shift in subsistence strategy. There is a shift in subsistence strategy from hunting and gathering, to animal rearing and agriculture. From hunting and gathering to animal rearing and agriculture. To animal rearing and agriculture. There are many important characteristics of Neolithic age. There are many important characteristics of Neolithic age, such as write down in bullet points. Well-developed pottery. Well-developed pottery. Village settlements. Village settlements. Refined tools and weapons. Refined tools and weapons. Next. Refined tools and weapons. Emergence of first village. Emergence of first village. Because of this, write down, next bullet point, because of this, Neolithic age often is called, Neolithic age is often called Neolithic revolution. Neolithic revolution. As it led to major changes in social and economic life. As it led to major changes in social and economic life. Major changes in social and economic life. Now, यहाँ पे जो sites हैं, these are important. Whatever names I'm mentioning here, these are important. For Paleolithic, I did not ask you to remember any of the names. For Mesolithic also, there are like Bhimbetka पता होना चाहिए. But in Neolithic sites, whatever sites I'm going to mention, they are important. You should remember their name. So the very first will be Mehergarh. Now Mehergarh is right now part of Balochistan. Mehergarh. Right down here. It is often called, एक bullet point में लिख लेना, it is often called the first village in, it is often called the first village in Indian subcontinent region. It is often called first village in Indian subcontinent region. Another site is Mahagara. Now Mahagara is near to what modern Allahabad or now Prayagraj. So it is near Prayagraj, Uttar Pradesh. आप लिख सकते हो. It is near Prayagraj, Uttar Pradesh. This site has the oldest evidence of rice anywhere in the world. Oldest evidence of rice anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. Sorry. Barzoham in Kashmir. Now, Barzo in Kashmir is very famous for two things. First, I already told you that we have found a grave where a dog is in the same grave as his master. And another reason it is very famous is for what we call pit dwelling culture, that we find many pits in Barzoham. And there was a lot of debate among historians that why these pits were used. One of the theory was that it may have been used for during winter condition. कि जब winter पे बहुत ज़्यादा temperature नीचे हो जाए, then maybe these pits were used for settlement. But most historians now believe is that it was perhaps used for storage of grain. That let's say, for example, when there is a drought or when there is no agriculture per se, then these pits played a very important role at that period of time. गड्ढे बहुत सारे, we find many pits. So in archaeological digging itself, we find many pits. बहुत सारे गड्ढे हमको दिखते हैं कि इनका purpose क्या है exactly. So just write down. In Barzoham, domestic dogs were buried along with their masters. In Barzoham, domestic dogs were buried along with their masters. Along with their masters. It is also popular for its pit dwelling culture. It is also popular for its pit dwelling culture. Another site is in Bihar. Chirand. Now this site is very famous that weapons made of animal bones have been found here. That you have weapons made of animal bones. You can write down in one line. It is famous for weapons made of animal bones. Then Maski and Hallur in Karnataka, they are also important sites. This site is very famous for animal rearing on a much larger scale. Maski and Hallur in Karnataka. These sites are famous for animal rearing. Animal rearing. I think class is going really slow. अभी तक Indus Valley Civilization पे हमको आ जाना चाहिए था. I will talk about Indus Valley Civilization in today's class. I will start the topic right now. But there is a small theme here, which I will discuss in the next class, is Chalcolithic Age. Now, Chalcolithic Age basically marks the first metal which was known to human beings, which is copper. So, Chalcolithic Age precedes Neolithic Age. And the first metal, because this discovery of this first metal was very, very useful, because now you can do agriculture on a much larger scale. So Chalcolithic Age, even though I am jumping here a little bit, but I will talk about the features of Chalcolithic Age and important sites associated with Chalcolithic Age in the next class, after I complete Indus Valley Civilization. But I am jumping here a little bit, and I am introducing you this topic of Indus Valley Civilization. But the significance should be very clear. First metal का फायदा ये है, you can do agriculture, आप जो पूरा agriculture से related जितने भी steps हैं, you can do that on a much better way compared to earlier tools which were made of animal bones or stones, right? So copper was the first metal which was known to human beings, and we do find Chalcolithic sites across the country. We find sites in South India, in Deccan region also, in northern and central India also we find Chalcolithic sites. So we'll talk about some important sites also, but in the next class. So give this next heading, Indus Valley Civilization. Now for the first time I am using the term civilization here. Now what exactly civilization mean? Peak of a culture. What do you mean by culture here? So when you say peak of a culture, then what does it mean? Okay, that's a very good point. That can amount. So he's saying that much more cultural development, and cultural development includes every facet of our life in a much larger territory. That's a valid point. What can be other? Hanji, Hanji. That's again a very, very good point. Civilization often, even though, so I should be very clear that civilization is a very abstract term. एब्स्ट्रैक्ट टर्म का मतलब ये होता है कि इसका कुछ एग्जैक्टली डिफाइन कर देना सिविलाइजेशन को बहुत मुश्किल है. मतलब डिफाइनिंग सिविलाइजेशन, ह्यूमन सिविलाइजेशन इज अ वेरी डिफिकल्ट थिंग टू डू. बट ऑफन इट विल अलाइन विथ अर्बन सेटलमेंट, दैट वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट अर्बनाइजेशन. what can be other features of civilization? Much more. That is again a very valid point, that economic activity is not again only limited to agriculture. We are talking about a diverse range of economic activities. Agricultural surplus, as I told you, will be of course the prerequisite of all other type of economic activity. But agriculture is not the only and not the most important economic activity. It does include lot of many other things. What else? Hanji. That is a, आजकल ये word use करना बड़ा मुश्किल है, वो politically incorrect हो सकता है. When you use the word civilized people, what do you mean by civilized people? Not barbarians. Okay, ठीक है. I will take that, but it's very important that in which context and how you are mentioning it. People are becoming very sensitive these days. So if you are mentioning uncivilized people, so what do you mean by uncivilized? How dare you like to call someone uncivilized? But okay, barbarianism nahi hai, right? We can further refine it. Someone. Sorry? Well-planned settlement. So again, urban settlement will be, it has to be well-planned settlement. That is a very valid point. Okay, so the mode how people used to live, there is a significant improvement in the standard of living basically. That's again a valid point. Often civilization will also include some form of writing. That is again a very important feature of civilization, that people are also writing things. They are not just language. So communication does not only include spoken language, but it also includes writing things. So I will repeat, and all of you have like very valid points, and frankly these are the markers of a civilization, that even though it is a very abstract term and defining civilization is a very difficult thing to do, But if I have to define it, and if I have to, let's say, for example, denote some features of civilization, then we have to again think in terms of different perspective. In terms of political, for example, let's say in terms of political development, we have to think that it does include a proper, well-established governance setup, कि कोई एक political setup है, rules and regulations हैं, those rules and regulations are being followed in a much larger territory. Second, even in terms of, let's say, for example, if you're talking about society, then in society also there is some sort of, although it does not have to be, but society will have some sort of differentiation also. For example, there are ruling class, elite class, then there are working class. So a differentiation in the society is often, again, an important feature of civilization. However, it does not have to be the most, like, a criteria for it. But often it turns out that many civilizations have this criteria also. Civilization also coincides with urban settlements, because urban settlements include not only agriculture as the economic activity, but many other type of economic activities such as craft tradition or trading community, merchant community. They will also become some sort of manufacturing of things is also happening. Even though it is not based on machinery, but some sort of manufacturing is definitely popular in a much larger settlement. So writing is often very important aspect of civilization. So all of this can be elements of civilization. And we use the word Indus Valley civilization. There is a reason for it, because even though we have not been able to decipher the script of Indus Valley civilization, but even archaeological findings are more than enough to tell you that this was a well-developed civilization. So Indus Valley civilization जो है, again, exactly continuity को maintain करना. जैसे for example, after Neolithic you have a Chalcolithic site. From Chalcolithic, there is a transitional phase which is called early Harappan period. Now, early Harappan period mainly means rural settlement, but in a much larger scale. This rural settlement mainly occurred in the northwest frontier of Indian subcontinent region. And let me show you on map what do I mean by that. So this here represents the first village, Mehergarh, which emerged in the Balochistan province. But when I'm talking about early phase of Indus Valley civilization, which basically marks 3300 to 2600 BC, a period of, again, more than 900 years, about 900 years. That period, sorry, 700 years, that period is, that mainly most of the settlement are rural settlements, and most of the settlement are around Indus and its tributaries. So you have many settlements like Mehergarh, even Harappa में बहुत सारे जो features हैं, they can be called settlements of early phase. You have a very famous site called Kot Diji, which is important for early phase also, as well as for mature phase. For us, mature phase is the important theme here. But this mainly included early settlement, and there is a transitional phase from Chalcolithic to early Harappan settlement, right? But जो सबसे important phase जो हम the reason we have to study this topic is what we call mature Harappan civilization, and the time period of about 2600 BC to 1900 BC. So mature Harappan civilization does include lot of sites. This map is much more clear. The reason I have mentioned this map, I have taken this map from Upinder Singh textbook, is that it does tell you about few of the sites which is not there. For example, Malwan is a site which is the southernmost site of Indus Valley civilization, very much visible here. Similarly, you have Shortugai, although Shortugai is mentioned there also, right? So because of few sites I have mentioned here, Almagirpur I think is not mentioned in that map, इसलिए मैंने यहाँ पे दे रखा है. The Alamgirpur, this is again a easternmost site of Indus Valley civilization. So, but this map is much more clearer. We are talking about some important urban centers which emerged around the river Indus as well as around river Saraswati. So, should we call it Indus Valley civilization? Because many sites of this age have been found which has nothing to do with Indus or its tributaries. Many of those sites, for example, let's say Rakhigari or even Dhaulavira. So many of these sites may have been part of the ancient Saraswati river mentioned in Vedas. So Saraswati का जो remnant है, that remnant might be what we call Gagra Hakkar river, जो राजस्थान और गुजरात के पार्ट से अभी जो रेमिनेंट है. But in ancient times, Saraswati River may have played a very, very important role in settlement. Right? So, however, there are some sites which are neither at Indus or Saraswati River. So, even Saraswati civilization is also not a very good term. So, the most accepted term is Harappan civilization, even though because Indus Valley civilization was used initially, but the most accepted term should be Harappan civilization. The reason is very simple, because Harappa was the first city which was discovered as part of this civilization. So what are the main features of this civilization? ये आपके prelims और mains examination दोनों के लिए important है. So I'm going to divide all the important findings of Indus Valley civilization into certain categories. For example, Indus Valley civilization is very popular for its urban settlement. Now what type of urban settlement we are talking about? What are the important features of Indus Valley urbanization? UPSC ने एक बार क्वेश्चन पूछा था इनफैक्ट 2014 में, टू व्हाट एक्सटेंट वी कैन लर्न फ्रॉम इंडस वैली सिविलाइजेशन इन मॉडर्न अर्बनाइजेशन प्रोसेस इनटू इंडिया. आप एक बार जाके क्वेश्चन देखना. आई थिंक आई हैव दैट क्वेश्चन ऑन स्लाइड्स आल्सो, दैट व्हाट द क्वेश्चन वाज दैट टू व्हाट एक्सटेंट वी कैन लर्न फ्रॉम अर्बनाइजेशन ऑफ इंडस वैली इन मॉडर्न पीरियड. एनीवेज, so features of urban settlement, what exactly are they? ये पता होना चाहिए पहली चीज. Second thing you should know is that the people of Indus Valley, despite we do not know what type of writing they practiced, but despite that we do know that they were involved in many types of economic activity, and they had come up with many type of technological developments, innovations. Even today we use a lot of those technologies in modern times. For example, using standard weights for measuring length or measuring weights also. So that is quite popular. Even in culture they had come up with many technological developments which will be discussed in art and culture classes. But I will give you a brief outline here. Jaise bronze was known at this point of time. Metallurgy was known to human beings at this point of time. That people knew how to in fact manipulate metals and how to use metals, not only for agriculture or something else, but also for artistic expression. For example, जो sculpture tradition of Indus Valley है, that is very popular, and we do find many sculptures which have survived thousands of years from now. The next thing, and the last thing perhaps you should know, is there are some here and there are some small topics. For example, what type of religion it was, what type of society it was, and I will tell you right now that all of the theories are matter of speculation, because we have no way of knowing that what type of religion or what type of society was there. But looking at the archaeological findings, historians have come up with certain conclusions. So I will talk about what are the different debates surrounding the society or surrounding the religion, but most of them are speculation. Next thing which you should know, which is in fact very important for examination perspective, that which are the important sites, where they are located and why they are famous for. कि जो important archaeological findings हैं, और ये आपको good thing ये है, the good thing is that in any other themes you do not have to go into details of archaeological findings, because that will make things very difficult. But because in Indus Valley civilization archaeology is the most important source, we have to know about the important sites and their important archaeological findings. And last theme which I'm going to discuss is that why the civilization declined. Okay, now let me show you some of the important archaeological findings before you write anything. And there is a third phase, by the way. There is a third phase of Indus Valley civilization which is called late phase, from 1900 BC to 1300 BC. And this late phase again includes rural settlement. So there is a rural settlement in the early phase, then there is mature phase which basically marks the urban phase, and first urbanization not only in India but in fact one of the first urbanizations anywhere seen in the world. And then Indus Valley civilization in the late phase, again it marks the rural settlement. Now this is the finding of Harappa, the first city which was discovered. Very interestingly, Harappa से बहुत ज़्यादा आपको information मिलता नहीं है, and the reason is very simple. Harappa was discovered in 19th century, mid of 19th century, and this was also the time that railway started in India. So बहुत सारे जो engineers थे और जो workers थे, they used bricks of Harappan civilization.
So that is why lot of structure of Harappa, it has not survived. It had survived for thousands of years, but because of developmental work, lot of bricks were stolen from here. So anyways, but despite that, we can come to certain conclusions regarding Harappa. The second city which was discovered was Mohenjo-daro. So Mohenjo-daro, for example, is very famous for a lot of things. I have picked up few important things from important sites. For example, this represents the citadel of Mohenjo-daro. Now citadel was at one of the location in the city, was at the higher elevation. So the entire city can be divided into two categories, upper town and lower town. Now upper town ho sakta hai, and perhaps that can be a very, like that can be an acceptable logical conclusion, that upper town may have many elites and ruling class, they may have resided in the upper town in the citadel, because we find lot of fortification around citadel, that the citadel needs to be protected. Then this is also very famous, a great public bath which has been found at Mohenjo-daro. Most accepted theory is that this public bath may have played a very important role in religious rituals, right? Some sort of religious ceremony, it may have occurred, but again that will be just an speculation. But it was a public bath available to everyone. Dancing girl, even today if you go to National Museum in Delhi, you will find this sculpture made of bronze, and a very famous technique called lost wax technique, which is used to construct this sculpture. It will be discussed in detail in art and culture classes, do not worry. But even today you can find this sculpture in National Museum. It has survived thousands of years. Pashupati seal, that was also found at Mohenjo-daro. It actually tells you some sort of religious deity. So Pashupati is a term used for that, and a lot of time people try to associate Pashupati with the worship of Mahadev, Shiva, in modern times. But if there is some sort of connection here, that is only based on speculation. However, there are some interesting features. For example, I will talk about in the next class, जब हम Vedic age discuss करेंगे, that phallus worship जो है, ling worship, that is not popular among early Aryans. In fact, it is frowned upon by early Aryans. But phallus worship does become very popular in the later Vedic age, and definitely in Mahajanpat age, and worship of Shiva does become a very important feature of religious development. And phallus worship is also present in Indus Valley civilization. And in fact, it is present across many other civilizations, but it was prominent in Indus Valley civilization. So it does tell you some sort of connection, that even people are interacting here, different set of people are interacting here, and that interaction may have led to development of religious ideas. So anyways, a very famous seal known as Pashupati seal, surrounded by different type of animals with horns, some sort of religious deity perhaps. Okay, now this is the most important site, Dhaulavira. Last year UPSC ने question भी पूछा था इस पे. So Dhaulavira has been added into UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is in Gujarat. Known for many things. For example, first thing is that all the cities, most of the cities have two-tier structure. There is a upper town, there is a lower town. But Dhaulavira has a three-tier structure. There is a middle town also. So there is a upper castle, जो citadel, typical citadel है. Then there is a middle town, and there is also a lower town. And Dhaulavira is very famous for its water reservoir and investment into conservation and sustainable use of water. So that is the remarkable feature of Dhaulavira as a site, that it is known for its water reservoirs as well as its investment into conserving water and its sustainable use. This is again a very, very famous site, Lothal. Lothal was a port city, dockyard. It has a very famous dockyard. Dockyard is basically was used to park ships or boats when they are not out in the ocean or in river. So Lothal, for example, look at the settlement even today, look at the uniformity of settlement, look at the type of bricks which has been used, and the fact that these bricks have survived thousands of years, more than 4,500 years, they are still standing here. So it actually tell you about the technology which was used by people of Harappan civilization. So this is the dockyard of Lothal, and Lothal में एक बहुत famous एक fire altar भी मिलता है हमको. Yagya fire altar is basically this yagya sort of thing. Now exactly what religious significance is of this fire altar, that will be again a matter of speculation, but we can come to a conclusion that it has certain religious significance. So fire altar. Then we find many type of seals in Harappan civilization. For example, lot of seals. Seals are basically carving of some sort of image onto a plaque. What exactly was the purpose of these seals? So most accepted theory is that seals were used for trading things. For example, to denote goods from one particular merchant. Every merchant may have their own seal, that it marks, that it identifies property of one particular person. It also may have lot of religious significance, because lot of seals does represent some mythical entity. For example, animals like unicorn that are represented on seals. They say this seal here, a very famous seal where a woman is being flanked by two men. It was found at Kalibangan, and there is a lot of speculation that what exactly it represents. Or look at this seal also, that a person who has this body of an animal, perhaps a horse or a tiger, but face of a human being. And here, are these two people fighting over this woman, or is this some sort of human sacrifice? There is a lot of debate surrounding it, and we frankly have no way of knowing about the religious practices, but it definitely has some sort of ritualistic significance. But what exactly does it represent? That is only a matter of speculation. And a very famous discovery which occurred at Surkutara. Surkutara mein we have found horse bones. Ab dekho, this is a problem I find with UPSC. In the starting of the class, I told you that there are many books written on ancient and medieval India. Many of those books were written many years ago. So for example, in 2017, I remember there was a question that UPSC prelims mein question tha, that Vedic civilization and Indus Valley civilization, they were compared. One of the statement was that iron was known to people of Indus Valley civilization. That is clearly wrong. We have not found any evidence of use of iron by people of Indus Valley civilization. So iron discovery jo hai bahut baad mein hota hai. And one of the statement was that people of Indus Valley civilization had no information about horses. तो खुद में एक तो बड़ा extreme statement है. I remember looking at that question, and I found that question by doing a normal Google search, that there is a Google book. That book was written in 1980s, and all the three statements were picked from one paragraph. And I did ask कि इसका answer UPSC statement को correct मानेगी, that people of Indus Valley civilization had no information about horses. But despite that, we went ahead with marking that statement wrong, because in R.S. Sharma, even if you read R.S. Sharma, and in fact any textbook you read, you'll find that horse bones have been found at Surkutara. But for UPSC, that statement was correct statement, that people of Indus Valley civilization had no information about horses. But even today, if the question is repeated, I will still consider that statement to be a wrong statement. And the good thing is now is that you can actually claim. आप एक file कर सकते हो कि जो statement है, ये अपना source कौन सा pick करा है आपने. So even though horse is not a very prevalent animal in Indus Valley, but we can come to a conclusion that it was known to people, even though it was not a very popular animal. We also find many type of shell working. For example, seashells were used to make bangles or many type of jewelries, necklaces, and there are some dedicated sites where this shell working was very, very famous. And last but not the least, this is a very famous Indus script. It was discovered near the gateway of Citadel Dhaulavira. Symbols, how they used to write, what exactly does it mean, we do not know. But very famously known as 10 Indus script discovered near the gateway of Dhaulavira. But what exactly it means, I will repeat. And hence the term proto-history. I will come back to the same thing. That because we do know that they knew how to write, but we have not deciphered it. So once it has been deciphered, let's say, then we have to shift our historical period to 2600 BC. Because right now we use historical period to be about 600 BC. Historical period means that जहाँ पे written records, writing जहाँ पे शुरू हो जाता है, right? अब एक बड़ा important question जो है, that what happened to this writing after decline of Indus Valley civilization? That let's say there are many reasons that civilization declined. We will talk about those reasons. But what happened to the writing? Because turns out that there is a huge gap from 1900 BC till only 600 BC के manuscripts हमको मिलते हैं, manuscripts which were compiled in 600 BC. There is a huge gap here. One theory can be that maybe people knew how to write, but they often used perishable materials. Those materials have not survived today, in today's period. That can be one theory. But still, it remains a mystery that what happened to the writing and how this entire script was lost, and other scripts like Brahmi and Kharosthi, they became much more popular. So this remains a question which still has not been answered. Anyways, give this heading Indus Valley Civilization and write down few things here. The Indus Valley Civilization, also known as Harappan Civilization, can be divided into three phases. Early Harappan phase, from 3300 to 2600 BC. Mature Harappan phase, and late Harappan phase from 1900 to 1300 BC. Write down here the early and late phase. Marks rural settlement, while the mature Harappan phase marks the mature Harappan phase marks the first urban settlement of Indian subcontinent. In fact, one of the most important urban civilizations of the world. The sites of Indus Valley civilization, आप IVC shortcut में लिख सकते हो. The sites of IVC extend from modern day northeast Afghanistan, to Pakistan and northwest India. So for example, let me briefly tell you about how this discovery of Harappan civilization came into being. It was discovered as early as 1820 by some British officials, but they thought that maybe it was the site where Alexander and Porus fought each other, as mentioned in Greek accounts. Or they may also have thought one of the another explanation was that maybe it was settlement of Chandragupta Maurya as mentioned in ancient text. But later with more and more discovery, only in 1920s and 1930s by Archaeological Survey of India, which was recently set up, and the first director, his name was Alexander Cunningham, he basically announced that we have found a new civilization here. So that happened in 1920s, and after that lot of excavation work occurred. Now there were many theories which were propounded by different historians that how this civilization came into being. One of the earlier theory was that it is an offshoot of Mesopotamian civilization. Mesopotamia is what modern day Iraq will be. Mesopotamian civilization includes a lot of things, right? But जो center जो Mesopotamian civilization का जो center है, that what modern day Iraq is. So one of the theory was that an offshoot of Mesopotamian civilization, because that predates Harappan civilization, and we do find a lot of coins and things like that into Mesopotamia, not coins, sorry. We do find a lot of things from Harappa which were produced in Harappa, but similar seals especially, and we found that in Mesopotamia. So, but that theory has been now rejected by all historians. We do believe that it emerged in itself as an independent civilization. Some sort of trade relationship was definitely there without any doubt, but that is only limited to trade relation. This is a very distinct civilization compared to any other contemporary civilization, चाहे वो Mesopotamia हो, चाहे वो Egyptian civilization हो. So this in itself is an independent civilization. And by the way, in writings of Mesopotamia and even in other regions, this place is called, this place is called Meluha. So the Indus Valley civilization, and there is a term called Meluha for it. And for example, किसी ने वो book पढ़ी, Immortals of Meluha? There is a very famous book called Ashwin Shanghi ki written book hai, Immortals of Meluha. So the term Meluha he has picked up from that people of Harappan civilization and people who may have lived beyond Indus, they were known as peoples of Meluha. Okay, a lot of students are asking about how do we know about age of something, especially carbon dating. So carbon dating is of course the most famous technique to know of age of something. There are many other ways also. For example, there are spectroscopical techniques which can be used. There are some other techniques which includes nuclear technology to know the age of things. But I will briefly tell you about carbon dating. That is a topic of science and technology. But मैं briefly बताऊंगा कि क्या होता है. Carbon dating को use करके हम age कैसे determine करते हैं. So carbon जो है, it has 6 atoms, 6 protons and 6 neutrons. This is the most famous prevalent carbon found in the world, right? It has 6 protons, hence the atomic number of 6, and because it also has 6 neutrons, it has atomic mass of 12. But there is another isotope of carbon which is very, very popular. It's 6C14. What it means is that it has 6 protons and 8 neutrons. So such type of things are called isotopes to each other. Now turns out that this 6C14 जो है वो radioactive है. Now radioactive का क्या मतलब होता है? That radioactive things are not very stable. जो radioactive nuclei होंगे, they are not very stable. They disintegrate. So disintegration process में क्या होगा? They will emit certain particles, and in the process of emission, they are going to, let's say for example, emit either alpha particle, beta particle or gamma particle. And this process of emission is called radioactivity, right? So for example, 6C14 emits a beta particle and converts into nitrogen. It converts into nitrogen 14. ये जो 6C14 है, वो nitrogen 14 में, nitrogen has atomic number of 7, atomic mass of 14. Now here is a very interesting thing about radioactivity which you should know, and that is that radioactivity follows a very interesting law. जैसे let's say for example, if there is a sample जहाँ पे कोई initially n number of nuclei हैं, and after time t, half of that has disintegrated into nitrogen, other half remains. तो number कितना बच गया? n by 2. Half of the carbon 14 has disintegrated into nitrogen because of radioactivity. Only half remains in time t. So you may think that if it follows a linear relationship, then after time t it will become 0, right? You can hope that, but that is not how radioactivity occurs. Turns out that radioactivity does not follow a linear law. it follows a type of decay which is called logarithmic decay. And what it means is that after time t, this n by 2 will become n by 4. And again after time t, it will become n by 8. And you get the idea that it will never per se come out to be 0, but it will gradually move towards 0. इस टाइप का कुछ कर्व होगा. If this n is here and t is here, that with time t, how the number of carbon 14 in a particular sample is going to reduce, it is going to follow such type of graph. और ये जो time t है, that is very useful. This is called half-life. So this time t is called half-life. Now any type of radioactivity will follow same type of disintegration but with different half-life. For example, we can have radioisotopes, we can have radioactive material जिनका half-life seconds में हो, milliseconds में हो, and we can have radioisotopes जिनका half-life thousands of years में हो. Turns out that half-life of carbon-14 is very near to about 5,000 years, right? It is actually less than 5,000 years, little bit of less than 5,000, but आप इतना exactly precise होने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. But half-life of carbon-14 is about 5,000 years. So if you can actually determine the sample of carbon-14, in कोई भी geological sample अगर आपको मिलता है, that how much carbon-14 it has and how it is actually disintegrating. So you can extrapolate that curve and you can actually come to a conclusion. जैसे for example होगा क्या कि lot of time, let's say for example if a tree has cut off, तो फिर जो carbon-14 जो initial concentration है, that is not going to increase now. So after that it is only going to disintegrate. As long as something is biologically active, carbon-14 जो है वो increase होते रहेगा या constant रहेगा. But the moment something becomes biologically inactive, the carbon-14 is going to decline. So you can actually extrapolate things that when did it actually started declining, and you can come to conclusions regarding its age. So this is the most famous method of dating any type of sample, but there are other methods also. This is not the only method, but this is the most famous method. Anyways, let's end today's class here. We will continue this discussion of Indus Valley civilization in the next class, and we will also talk about Vedic civilization in the next class.